On May 5th, 2009, the quiet town of Columbia, Illinois, a peaceful community on the banks of the Mississippi River, suddenly became the scene of an unthinkable tragedy. Inside what seemed like the safety of a suburban home, a picture-perfect family was wiped out in a single night. When police entered, they found Sheri Coleman, 31, dead on her bed, a rosary still clutched tightly in her hand. In the nearby bedrooms lay her two sons, Garett, 11, and Gavin, 9, strangled to death. Their sheets were still neatly tucked, as if death had crept in silently while they slept. On the white walls, chilling words were scrawled in red spray paint. "Punished." You knew this would happen. One of the boys even had paint smeared directly onto his body. Local reporter Chris Hayes could only describe it with horror. This was truly a monster. Someone who would spray paint the walls, spray paint a child, and then strangle them in their sleep. That's a monster, but the most haunting question remained. Who could have done this? The killer moved through the home that night with disturbing familiarity, strangling each victim without ever needing to force a single step inside. It all began with a 7 a.m. phone call. Detective Justin Barlow received a report from none other than Chris Coleman, Sheri's husband, the father of the two boys. Coleman claimed he was at the gym, had been trying to call his wife, and feared something was wrong. When Barlow checked the house, what he discovered would haunt him forever. Sheri bore 3 deep ligature marks on her neck and a dark bruise around one eye, signs of a desperate struggle. But for Garett and Gavin, there were no signs of resistance. Death had come quickly and mercilessly. Columbia was the kind of small town where violent crime felt impossible. That was exactly why Chris Coleman had chosen it, a place where faith and peace could be the foundation for his family's life. But that night, darkness crept into the Coleman home, and every piece of evidence began pointing towards someone very, very close. To understand this tragedy, we need to look into the life of Christopher Coleman. Chris was born and raised in a deeply religious family in Chester, Illinois. His father, Pastor Ron Coleman, and his mother, Connie, lived with strict devotion to their faith. To neighbors, the Coleman family seemed like a model of respectability and virtue. Within that environment, Chris was taught that faith was the foundation of life, and that discipline and obedience were non-negotiable. From an early age, he was expected to be an example, someone destined to follow in his father's footsteps. But his path took a different turn when he joined the Marine Corps, serving as a military dog handler. It was during a training session that he met Sheri Weiss, an Air Force military police officer. Their love came quickly and intensely, and before long, a trip to Chicago turned into a wedding. Not long after, their first son, Garett, was born, followed by Gavin. A close-knit, happy family began to take shape. To many, Chris and Sheri seemed like the perfect example. A devoted husband, a gentle wife, and 2 adorable children. And his career, Chris rose quickly. He joined Joyce Meyer Ministries, a global evangelical organization, and within just a few years became head of security, then Joyce Meyer's personal bodyguard. Joyce had known Chris since he was a child, and she trusted him completely. To her, he wasn't just an employee, but a loyal insider she could rely on. The Coleman family became even more admired. They looked like a picture of perfection, moral, loving, and, as many believed, blessed. But within that seemingly sacred world, where religion and righteousness cast a glowing facade, darkness began to creep in. Whispers, resentments, and quiet discontent waited patiently behind the curtain of virtue, ready to emerge. But then, the cracks began to show. In November 2008, the Coleman family's peace was shaken when threatening emails surfaced. They were filled with vulgar language and chilling warnings, targeting not only Chris, but also Joyce Meyer and her son. The message was unmistakable. Stop preaching or pay with your life. Just weeks later, in January 2009, the threats escalated. Chris went to his neighbor, Detective Sergeant Justin Barlow, with a new letter, this time shoved directly into the family's mailbox. The handwritten note echoed the earlier emails, but with a sharper, more personal edge. Tell Joyce to stop preaching. If not, your family will die. I'll kill them all while they sleep. Sheri was stunned when she found out. The letter had arrived at the exact time Chris was away in Hawaii with Joyce Meyer. When he returned, he finally went to the police. Detective Barlow moved quickly. An outdoor security camera was mounted right above the Coleman's mailbox, and patrols around their neighborhood were stepped up. But strangely, no one ever appeared. The footage showed nothing suspicious. No shadow, no suspect, no lead. The threats hung in the air, yet the person behind them remained invisible. The only footage captured was painfully ordinary. Chris Coleman tossing a ball with his sons, Garett and Gavin, in the front yard. But just 12 hours later, that very home would become the scene of an unspeakable crime. In the bedroom, Sheri and her 2 young boys were found dead. The threats that once lingered like shadows had now become a chilling prophecy. Connie, Chris's mother, later recalled how terrified Sheri had been after each letter, especially the one that arrived while Chris was in Hawaii with Joyce Meyer. From that moment, Sheri believed the person behind the threats was far too close. On the morning of May 5th, Chris left their home on Robert Drive to work out in South Street. Louis Sinadlaban. He called Sheri, left a voicemail, and sent text after text. When no reply came, Chris reached out to police, asking Detective Sergeant Justin Barlow to check on the house. Barlow, along with another officer, arrived at the Coleman home. They noticed a basement window left wide open. Carefully stepping inside, they moved through the darkened rooms until they were met with a horrifying sight. Scrawled across the walls in bright red spray paint were the words, "I told you so. You have paid. And I am always watching." Upstairs, in what should have been the safest place, only death remained. But then, a chilling detail came to light. Just weeks earlier, Sheri had texted a friend. "If anything happens to me, Chris did it." She confided that he wanted a divorce and that she and the boys had become nothing more than a burden standing in his way. Her words were a grim prophecy, and yet, they couldn't save her. When investigators asked the obvious question, why would a bodyguard be the target of threats instead of Joyce Meyer herself? Suspicion turned sharply toward Chris Coleman. From that moment on, every move he made was scrutinized, and the darkest secret behind the perfect family began to surface. Detectives soon uncovered the name Tara Lintz. Even as Chris stood at the graves of Sheri and their 2 sons, he was secretly texting her. Tara wasn't a stranger. She had once been Sheri's close friend back in high school. When investigators seized Chris's computer, a digital trove spilled open. Intimate photos and videos, flirty text messages, even personal details about Tara. Her measurements, ring size, and the name of the little girl they dreamed of having together. Zoe. During the Hawaii trip, Chris was supposed to be protecting Joyce Meyer. Instead, he was caught with Tara in a hotel room. It was a betrayal, not only of his wife and children, but of an entire community that had trusted him. When questioned, Chris's father, Pastor Ron Coleman, rushed to defend his son. He claimed Tara was simply fulfilling what Sheri no longer cared to give. All men have needs, he argued. If a wife doesn't respect her husband, he'll find respect somewhere else. And when asked if Sheri had been a bad wife, Ron dismissed it, saying it was only a brief moment where she had abandoned her duties. But to investigators, no excuse could cover the cold, undeniable trail of infidelity. As investigators dug deeper, a chilling truth emerged. The threatening emails that had kept the Coleman family in fear had been sent from Chris's own computer. The man who wept at his wife and children's funeral was hiding a double life. Then came more clues. Along Chris's usual route to the gym, over the Jefferson Barracks Bridge, investigators uncovered evidence. Phone records made things even stranger. On the morning of May 5th, 2009, instead of driving straight home as he normally did, Chris took an odd detour. Piece by piece, the puzzle formed a dark picture. Chris was no longer the grieving husband and father. Police believed he was the killer. Just days later, Major Jeff Connor, head of the investigation, announced they knew exactly who the killer was. The turning point came when famed forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Baden joined the case. His conclusion was damning. Sheri and the two boys had died before Chris ever left the house that morning. That timeline was critical. It suggested Chris may have been inside the home when the murders took place. Chris claimed that when Sheri didn't answer his calls, he asked his neighbor, Sergeant Justin Barlow, to check on her. Surveillance footage showed Barlow entering the Coleman home at 6:51 a.m., where he discovered the bodies and the chilling spray-painted messages on the walls. Just 5 minutes later, Chris pulled into the driveway at 6:56 a.m., right before the first officers arrived. But what stunned everyone wasn't the timing. It was his reaction. When told his wife and two young sons were dead, Chris never asked how they died. He never tried to see their bodies. Evidence showed he never even went upstairs. Chris Hayes, a reporter for KTVI, recalled that police thought they might have to stop him from rushing into the crime scene, but they never had to. Chris didn't even try. Instead, he sat collapsed on the front lawn, his head buried in his hands. His father, Pastor Ron Coleman, remembered that horrific morning. When he arrived, Chris was sitting on the ground just outside the house. Minutes later, Chris was placed into an ambulance, and Ron climbed in beside him. It was a dark morning, but there were still details investigators couldn't ignore. A paramedic noticed unusual scratches on Chris's arm. When pointed out, Chris suddenly lashed out, pounding his fists against the inside of the ambulance. Even as suspicion grew, Ron Coleman clung tightly to his belief. His son was innocent.
Is there any way that there's a part of Chris that you don't know that could have been capable of this?
Not in my view. You couldn't put something around your kid's throat unless you're a monster.
But while his father clung to faith, police saw something very different. They believed Chris Coleman's role in the tragedy was far darker than his family would ever admit. And just hours after the bodies of Sheri Coleman and her two sons were discovered, Chris was taken straight into the interrogation room.
Just hours after the grim discovery of Sheri Coleman and her two sons, police brought Chris Coleman into the interrogation room.
Well, I set my alarm clock for 5:30 and I used my phone for my alarm clock. And got up at 5:30, went in the bathroom, put these clothes here I got on, and went to the bathroom and basically got in the truck and left. And drove off. I got to where I was at, but called Sheri to wake her up, get her going. She didn't answer, of course. And so I went on to the gym, to Gold's Gym, over by Ronnie's Plaza in South County, and started working out. I texted her text her at some point. I might even called her again. I don't remember. I could probably look at my phone if you want me to.
Do you guys have a home phone number too, or just cell phones?
We just use cell phones. So and I text her, and then she still didn't respond, and probably now it had to have been well after 6 o'clock sometime when I texted her or called her. I'm sure it's still on her phone what time it was.
Okay.
And she didn't respond. It's not like her because the kids should have been up and stuff, or getting up and going by then, I believe. And so I called her again. Called her again on the way back, or when I was getting ready to leave, and she didn't respond again.
Inside the interrogation room, detectives started with the simplest question. The night before the murders, they asked, "Did you and Sheri argue?" Chris calmly replied, "No, everything was fine." He even described how that night, Sheri had rested her head on his arm while they sat together on the couch. His tone was firm, as if nothing unusual had happened inside that house. But detectives weren't convinced. They pressed harder, pointing out that neighbors had reported hearing an argument. Then came the blunt question. If there wasn't a fight, why would they say that? Chris shook his head, denying it all. He insisted he was telling the truth. And when asked for more details, whether he and Sheri had gone to bed at the same time, Chris said yes, describing their routine, brushing their teeth, locking the doors, and going to bed, just like any other night.
Come on, Chris, help me out with this.
I'm telling you, I've already told you. I told everybody. I told the guy in the ambulance. I told you. I told him.
The more we go back like this, the more it makes me think that there maybe even isn't a good explanation for it. I mean, we need to know what happened. We can't keep going on this. It didn't, she was alive when I left. We know that's not true, and there's nothing we can do about changing that. If we know she wasn't alive when you left this morning, there's got to be an explanation. Now is the time to tell us. Now is the time to get this out of the open.
I don't know what else to tell you.
Yes, you do. Yes,
No.
you do. You have to tell me the truth, Chris.
I'm telling you the truth.
You.
When the detective stepped out, Chris sat alone. His phone buzzed. A text from his father. "Do you need a lawyer?" A brief moment, but it revealed just how much the tension was rising. When questioning resumed, investigators shifted their focus. "Is there someone else in your life? Any romantic relationship outside your marriage?" Chris mentioned a woman named Tara from Florida. He tried to downplay it, saying she was just a friend to talk to. But for the detectives, that detail lit up like a flare. This wasn't just friendship. Then they circled back to the morning of the murders. They asked, "Did Sheri seem fine when you left for the gym?" Chris answered firmly, "Yes." What he didn't realize was that forensic evidence had already painted a very different picture. Sheri and the two boys may have been dead before Chris ever walked out the door.
And you know what? For right now, I'm just going to have a seat there. I'm sure that's what I'm going to do, but here's another water if you need it. Okay. I mean, obviously, we got an investigation to do, so I got to go over your Miranda rights just because we're talking to you, we're talking to
I understand.
a lot of people, okay?
I've done it for myself.
Just, I'll tell you what, from the beginning, let's just start off from when you got up this morning until the time you pull up at the house.
The detectives stopped circling around. They confronted Chris directly, telling him that the physical evidence contradicted his story. But Chris insisted. Sheri was alive. The boys were alive. The atmosphere in the interrogation room grew heavier. When asked if he had any role in the deaths of his wife and children, Chris flatly denied it. Pressed further, was anyone else involved? He shook his head, claiming he didn't know. Then came the cutting question. "Have you ever spoken to anyone about arranging Sheri's death?" Chris snapped, his temper flaring as he vehemently denied it. But in the end, the investigation's focus tightened back onto one name: Tara.
How long have you been in a relationship with Chris?
Since late November, early December.
Where all you guys been together?
Phoenix. and Hawaii, Maui.
What would he tell his wife when he was gone?
He would have just told that he was working.
Were you having an affair? The question came sharp and relentless. At first, Chris denied it, but eventually admitted to conversations that had clearly crossed the line for a married man. Detectives began piecing together the picture. A husband trapped in a failing marriage, entangled in a secret romance. Then they dropped the bombshell. Tara had cooperated with Florida investigators, handing over intimate texts and revealing photos Chris had sent her. The interrogation room fell into silence. The story of an intruder who killed Sheri and the boys collapsed completely. Detectives revealed that the threatening emails matched Chris's own handwriting. Even the spray paint used to scrawl messages on the walls was traced back to him, purchased months earlier. Chris tried to explain it away, claiming it was only for paintball games with his son. Chris's father, Ron, kept defending him. To Ron, it was just a fleeting affair, a mistake his son was trying to escape. But police saw a different story. Evidence, witnesses, and Tara's detailed testimony all painted a much darker picture. In Florida, detectives described Tara as both heartbroken and obsessed. She knew far too many details, clinging to Chris with a possessive grip. She even told investigators that Chris often worked to cover his tracks, at times sending photos to prove he wasn't cheating. The affair was undeniable. Chris Coleman had promised Tara marriage and children, commitments his own father admitted Chris couldn't avoid forever. Tara, meanwhile, fully cooperated, handing over texts and photos. Chris chose silence. Detectives shifted tactics, pressing harder. If Chris didn't confess, they warned, he would lose everything. Not just in this life, but in the next. On May 19, 2009, Chris Coleman was arrested at his parents' home. He was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. Investigators announced that Chris himself had spray-painted the threatening messages on the walls, staging the crime scene to look like the work of an intruder. After repeated delays, the trial finally began in April 2011. A jury was brought in from outside the county to avoid local bias. Inside the courtroom, the web of lies, secrets, and betrayal unraveled, revealing the true Chris Coleman. After just 2 days of testimony and 15 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict on May 5, 2011, exactly 2 years to the day after the murders. The symbolism was undeniable. Chris Coleman was found guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder. But the road to that verdict hadn't been simple. According to juror Kim Ferrari, 4 members of the panel were initially unconvinced. They needed one final piece, something that would erase every doubt. And then it surfaced, almost by accident. In the deliberation room, jurors discovered display boards with photos printed on the back. Hidden there were images of Chris and Tara Lintz together, dating back to October 2008. This was crucial, because Chris had sworn their relationship began in November, after the threatening emails to Sheri had appeared. Photos don't lie. Chris's timeline collapsed completely. For the jury, it was the final nail in the coffin. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Juror Kim Ferrari recalled how quickly everyone aligned. She even admitted that if given the chance, she would have voted for the death penalty without hesitation, and believed most of the others would have too. But Chris Coleman never gave them that opportunity. Immediately after his conviction, he waived the jury's right to sentencing, leaving the final decision to Judge Milton Wharton. It was an unexpected move. But to Ferrari, the reason was obvious. Chris knew that if the jury decided, he'd be facing death. Judge Milton Wharton sentenced him to life in prison without parole. No escape, no second chances. Ferrari wasn't disappointed. To her, this was another form of justice, forcing Chris to live out the rest of his days behind bars, face to face with his crimes. In reality, the death penalty wouldn't have changed much. Just 2 months before the trial, the state of Illinois had officially abolished capital punishment. Chris Coleman was sent to Pontiac Correctional Center, a maximum security prison between Bloomington and Chicago. By August 2011, he was transferred to Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin for the ironic reason of protecting his own safety. His attempts at appeals were swiftly denied. Chris Coleman would never walk free again, but the tragedy didn't end there. In December 2012, the bodies of Sheri Coleman and her 2 sons, Gavin and Garett, were exhumed from Evergreen Cemetery in Chester, Illinois. They were reburied near Sheri's hometown, just outside Chicago. The decision ignited fierce controversy. The Coleman family fought bitterly, even taking the matter to court. Chris's parents, Ron and Connie Coleman, wanted the graves to remain in Chester, believing they had the right to be close to their grandchildren's final resting place, because no matter what, they were still family. But the court saw it differently. The judge ruled that a convicted murderer cannot decide the burial place of his victims, especially when their graves would rest beside his family. In the end, the decision was final. Sheri and her 2 boys would rest in peace where her family chose, far from the shadow of the man who took their lives. Still, the original gravestone at Evergreen Cemetery remained untouched. Paid for by Chris's parents, it stood for a time as a chilling reminder of the lives lost and of wounds that never fully healed. Chris Coleman didn't stop. After his sentence, he and his attorneys kept filing appeals. But in January 2015, every attempt was denied. The life sentence held firm, yet Chris kept talking. In April 2018, during a phone interview with Crime Watch Daily, he once again insisted he was innocent. He claimed there was a key detail the jury had never heard. At the time, he owned 2 laptops. One he carried with him on business trips, the other remained at home or in his office. According to Chris, the threatening email sent to his wife could have come from the computer he didn't have with him. It was his last attempt to plant doubt that maybe, just maybe, someone else was behind it all. That same month, Pastor Ron Coleman, Chris's father, appeared on television defending his son. He refused to believe Chris could ever kill. For him, adultery was never a reason to murder. Inside the courtroom, however, Chris's defense tried a new tactic. They demanded a new trial, arguing that photos shown to the jury should never have been admitted. According to them, that evidence was prejudicial and unfairly influenced the verdict. Surprisingly, a judge agreed to review the claim. In March 2019, a hearing on the evidence was granted. But after months of consideration, in July 2020, the judge officially denied the appeal. And so, Chris Coleman remained exactly where he was, behind bars, serving life without parole, still proclaiming he was framed, still insisting he was innocent. But the courts didn't believe him, and justice didn't change. The final question is no longer, did he do it? But rather, why did Chris Coleman ever think he could get away with it? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to explore more haunting true crime cases, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an episode.